Great. And Carolyn, can you advance to the next slide? Welcome everyone to the ARH Resource and Funding Engagement meeting. Today our topic is readiness, and we're glad that you took the time to join us today. We look forward to getting your input. A couple of housekeeping things before we start. We do have a large audience, so it's helpful if you can make sure that your Zoom box has your name, if possible, include your organization, but that way we can get a sense of who is all with us. So thank you for doing that. And we're going to run a few polls here to see who's in the room. But first, I wanted to see if we could pull off a little warm-up activity. So I was wondering if those of you who attended the August 17th meeting, which was the engagement launch meeting, if you could turn on your cameras, or if you watch the video that was posted on our website, just turn on your cameras, a little quick warm-up activity so we can make sure that cameras are working and all that. Nice to see you, familiar faces. Thank you. Appreciate that. So yes, we did have our kickoff meeting for this engagement series on August 17th. We appreciate the input that you provided us during that meeting. And thanks for those of you who are new. Thanks for joining us today. And we'll try to provide a little bit of an overview throughout the meeting. And I will also share the website in a little bit where you can make sure that you're tracking the materials for this meeting series. So, welcome, and folks are still joining us, but we're going to go ahead and get started. And Carolyn, do you want me to launch the poll since you're working the Okay, so I'm going to do a quick poll. We're trying to see who's in the room by area. And so we created 4 geographic kind of areas for you to choose from. So let's see who is here. These categories will also mirror the breakout rooms that we will have for small group discussions later. So it's helpful for us to kind of get a sense up front how many people we can expect in our small group discussions later. All right, so folks are still joining, but looking like we have good divide. We got a lot of statewide folks here today, which is a little surprising for me, but glad to see it. Great, we'll give it another minute for those who are just joining. If you can let us know what area you work most in or an area that you represent. This will be helpful as we work into breakout rooms a little bit later on. Okay, great. Well, we've got slowed down on our traffic here. So we're going to go ahead and end this poll. Thank you very much. Here's who we have. Can you see my screen on the results? Okay, great. So like I said, we do have a fair amount of folks that work statewide. Looks like 35% Portland Metro, got some urban folks outside of Metro, and 18% in rural Oregon. Great. So let's see, we are going to now just kind of get a sense for who's in the room by type of stakeholder, and Zoom only gives me, I think, 6 boxes to choose from. So I had to consolidate and group people, but we're just kind of looking to see, what best describes your work with affordable rental housing. So these are not perfect categories by any means, and lots of grouping of type of folks, but helpful for us to get a sense for the audience today. And thank you. We got a lot of folks populating this. I'll share it in just a second. Again, this is just, kind of generally speaking, what category of work are you engaged with? Okay, great. This has is slowing down, so give it another 20 seconds or so. Majority of folks are looking to be in the Housing Authority developer or developer consultant group. And I'm going to go ahead and end the poll here at 73% complete. I'll share with you who we are in this space with today. You guys can see that screen? Okay, great. All right. And for those on the phone, we have the majority of folks in the space, 45% in the Housing Authority developer or developer consultant. The next highest category is other. So I didn't do great with putting my categories together. So lots of different interests here with affordable rental housing and in the industry itself. So we appreciate all of you showing up, and we'll move on here to the next slide, Carolyn, as we launch into the agenda. This is how we're going to spend our time together. We have 2 hours for these meetings. And so we'll spend a little bit of time on process agreements. We will spend the bulk of our time on the topic of readiness. So we will have a staff presentation based on the discussion document that was posted online earlier this week, and a set of questions that we're asking you specifically to respond to today. So we'll do a brief presentation on the topic, spend a little bit of time in this large group format to clarify your questions about the presentation, about the questions themselves that we're asking you to address. So we'll spend a little bit of time in the large group doing that before we then prepare to enter smaller group discussions in the breakout room. We'll have about 30 minutes there to answer the questions that we're posing. We're going to be using a tool called the Easy Retro Board. So we'll be capturing your input in that format and then synthesizing that, posting it on our website. After the breakouts, we'll come back to the large group briefly and talk about closing and kind of next steps. So that's how we'll spend our time today. And with that, Carolyn, I think if you can stop share, I'm going to I want to make sure folks have a reference to where the materials are. So I'm just going to show my screen really quick so that you all have understand where the materials are and references for this meeting series. Okay, so here is I'll put it in I think it's in our last slide too in terms of where you can find this, but this is resource design, ARH funding, resource and funding engagement, background on why we're collecting this input right now, and how the engagement will work, and each of the meetings. So thanks again for those who attended on August 17th or watched the meeting recording that we posted. We have a synthesis of the input that you provided to us here on the website, and incorporating that as we can into this process. So just wanted to make sure that you all have reference to that. And then this, for each of the meetings, we will have a document, a preparation document. So this is what we're discussing today, and we'll see the presentation momentarily on this topic. So you can expect that for each of the meetings going forward in this series. Okay, so with that, I think, unless there are any questions or anything anyone wants to pose before we launch into the topic, we do have the Q&A function available, so please feel free to use that or raise your hand. As I mentioned, we will go through the presentation and then we'll pause and take questions, but if you have something before we're complete with the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A. Okay, so with that, next slide, Carolyn, and we'll turn it over to Ty. I'm sorry, wrong. We're going to turn it over to Natasha. No, wrong. Brief stop on process agreements. So sharing these with you today as we are looking to really foster an inclusive environment with these meetings. And these are agreements that we use at OHCS. Many of us have started using these after training with the Center for Equity and Inclusion. And it's just it's a reminder to practice these things and practice an inclusive environment and how we can address white supremacy culture in our environment and be responsible in how we're showing up in spaces and working to hold each other accountable to addressing equity and racial justice. So wanting to share this, we will be using these process agreements throughout the meeting series, and also just something to think about as you go into your small group environments. We're really hoping that, again, fostering an inclusive environment where underrepresented voices feel comfortable to share in spaces, and hopefully along the way, building relationships among each of you to have positive working relationships where you can dialogue together about these topics as well. So just a brief stop on process agreements, and again, practicing these as we work together throughout this meeting series. Okay, now moving on, Carolyn, we're going to check in with Natasha, and she's going to do an introduction to the general topic here. Thanks.
Thank you, Kim. And thank you everybody for being here today. This is Natasha Detweiler-Davy, she, her, Affordable Rental Housing Director here at OHCS. And so I just wanted to kind of start us by just kind of checking back in on the broad process that we are looking to with a real sincere interest in getting everybody's input on the table and into our conversations as we are having, walking through the sequence of conversations. And I just want to underscore the importance of having all of your voices reflected at the table, and just acknowledge that we are listening. As Kim just walked through, as we're having these conversations, we'll be continuing the practice of summarizing the feedback and finding the best ways that we can to be responsive. I think some of the input that we received on our last kind of big kickoff conversation, which is just about this is how our engagement will work, was to signal that we will have a need for some additional focus groups and talking to specifically rural and culturally specific development stakeholders. And that is absolutely something that we are working to be able to do and include as our process moving forward. So those kind of deliberate side focus group conversations won't be in this large group format, but it will be specific organizations that will be reaching out to dive into those conversations. So certainly as you're submitting input, certainly flag if you're interested in being considered for those conversations. If you're one of a rural or a culturally specific partner wanting to give input. I think another piece that we heard was, kind of just a reiteration of why is there information or evidence about why we are wanting to make these pivots. And just, to follow up on that, I think we'll find more opportunities to dig into it in the future. But, I think the broad reform that we are working on for our funding efforts is really efficiency of practice. We want to be aligned with the governor's executive order to facilitate and expedite production, a structure where we have a very many layers of different offerings over different times with different application processes doesn't do that. and to readiness in particular. And so I think I will try to center as we kick off each of these structured engagements around what is the connect that we are at here. Readiness is something that I think is, I guess, obviously very, very tied to everything. So all of the foundational work that you're doing in community to get projects ready to go. It is also something that, from the lens of expediting delivery of housing into community, if we're putting resources to a project that can't close, isn't ready to close for years, versus one that could go forward sooner, then that's not expediting it. And then at the same time, there is really the struggle of market realities that projects have been experiencing for years. And in a stable market where you have stable costs for construction, for debt, for all of those layers in your projects, it worked to be able to do a solid guesstimate of your costs with some inflationary factors in your pro forma as you submit your NOFA, and then work through the diligence and do that construction closing a year or 2 years out after that initial reservation. But what I think pretty much kind of all across all of our projects at this point in time has been a real resonant theme of cost escalation, cost volatility, as projects are working through all of their diligence, getting those final cost estimates together, finding that we have significant funding gaps in projects. We did, as most are aware, we stood up our market cost offset process to be able to deploy an incredible $50 million in legislative commitment to address those funding gaps. And that alone has not been sufficient to be able to mediate that impact. And I do think, and I, here, have had many conversations with folks around, well, let's just have the MCOF. Let's plan that when we're, as we're approaching that closing table, we will, have a resource to be able to fill those gaps. And I think it just is functionally problematic from the standpoint of, if we're funding you with different resources later, what was the validity of that first funding offering? And it becomes, again, like a constant moving benchmark, both for you to be able to be planful and know with certainty what resources you'll be able to access and move forward with, as well as for us to be streamlined and being able to plan our closings and structure all of that work. And so it really is on that lens of both expediting and prioritizing resources to those projects that are able to move forward, as well as reducing the risk of that cost escalation being so very different to impact project budgets as they're ready to move forward. It's our hope that we can kind of balance all of the needs that we'll be kind of talking through today. And again, really needing to hear all of your voices around what process benchmarks would be helpful. How do we structure, move ourselves closer to the place of having more ready projects as we're making final funding commitments to move forward. And Ty will walk us through the content, and it includes, some of the other states, what are they doing, as not decisions, but inspiration for figuring out how it is that we want to align this work in Oregon. So I think, again, there's a lot of different drivers. We can kind of put together lots of summaries around what the cost escalation has been and experienced in portfolio. I think there's been a lot, OHCS has stepped up to do funding gaps. I think there's other public funding partners, in particular in Metro and Portland, that have been trying to find resources to do the same. And that as a system, we feel that it is in this current market, it makes sense to have a little bit more certainty as we're providing that initial final funding reservation to make sure that you have sufficient resources to move forward. Let's see. So that was kind of the importance of engagement. I guess also want to mention, aside from these conversations, we'll be having some kind of specific focus group conversations And we will be on a monthly basis engaging Housing Stability Council to provide input, guidance, direction to us as we are seeking input and from stakeholder community as well as our Housing Stability Council. So we'll be kicking that off on Friday. It will be, as time goes on in these council meetings, this will be a large, pretty bulky conversation. So we'll find ways to have these pieces connect back to that group, and want that to feel meaningful, and really want to be able to highlight your voices as we're bringing our potential recommendations forward to them over the next several months. And it will really be a result of all of this collaborative work that we will land into final recommendations. We'll be, before anything is really final, we'll be casting it back out to everybody to be able to give more input and provide more guidance around all of that. And so I think with that, I'm going to hand it off to Ty to dig in on readiness.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being in community with us. For folks who don't know me, I'm Ty Dunson-Strain. I'm the production manager here at OHCS, and just want to acknowledge that affordable housing is, it is like running a marathon. So we do not want to diminish the work that you folks already do. It is we appreciate the grit and tenacity to get these projects through the finish, and we are definitely in partnership with all of you, and we know that challenges are different throughout the state. They're from what you folks face around readiness and getting a project from kind of the back of the napkin to the physical tenants moving in is it's a lot, and we appreciate that you folks still choose this as your chosen profession. So with that, for just a couple of pieces that I'd like to build off as far as just kind of defining that. So we're for the first piece around really trying to fund projects, get from closer to when OHCS determines the award, really trying to get those projects closer to construction close it's as a starting point for conversation, a 6 month window. We for the various flavors of money with OHCS, the timelines vary, could be, but we're just acknowledging, from a starting point, we landed on a 6 month window. So with that, we understand, we need to do a check-in with you folks to really understand the challenges and places that OHCS would need to also streamline to help achieve this readiness to proceed. So today is a no decisions have been reiterating, no decisions are kind of set in stone, but we're trying to really get an understanding from what would it take to get some of these potential due diligence items a little bit further closer to application. So next slide. So these are kind of the broad categories that were kind of taken from us, snapshots of our current NOFA's processes that we typically see, and also just kind of standardize what other state HFAs look for is part of their application process, which some of these are already in place, but at a high level, balanced sources of uses, zoning, environmental reviews, permitting, and lender investor commitments. So depending on the funding source, a variety of what is asked for at application is due diligence required changes. So we just acknowledge that we do have some elements of these readiness categories are already in place, and looking to get solicit even more impact, because as mentioned previously, we are trying to support the governor's executive order. So we know we have to look to potentially doing things differently. Next slide. So this is kind of a graphic of the marathon race that you folks are already kind of familiar with, from project concept all the way to operational maintenance. For some, it's 60 years, and for participating jurisdictions, some projects might they have 99 years. So although some of you folks might be around in 99 years, to see these projects to the tail end. Let me know your secret if you already have the secret to live to 200. Next slide. So current processes, we tend to early fund certain projects, but so we're not always last in funding wise. Right now we have I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, we did do, I think, over the last 2 years, 20 or so, or close to 20 separate NOFAs that are very customized. So process wise, that requires staff time on OACS side, but also staff time with you folks that are submitting applications, and also are participating jurisdictions who are also funding in partnership with these applications. So that's the current state of the land. Next slide. Yeah. So these are just some examples of what other states are doing as far as a mix of threshold requirements around readiness, points around readiness, or tiered system. These are just examples. We're not endorsing any of these as far as just kind of a snapshot of what we've seen through other states. Yeah, there's just every state is different, and just acknowledging that Oregon, the dynamics that happen in other HFA states Oregon is unique, that we're a one-stop shop. So we have some unique abilities to be a one-stop shop, but that also creates some dynamics that we process-wise we need to plan for and account the unique challenges that you folks are well aware of in your local areas. And so just for references points. Next slide. Yeah, so there's in queuing up, this conversation is just the start of multiple conversations, but it will, we do understand that, with a movement for readiness, there is going to be an upshoot potentially in due diligence costs that need to get paid for, so that this conversation will feed directly into the pre-development conversations and support those efforts. So content, as much content you folks provide us, we definitely appreciate it, and it'll be the basis of future conversations. Okay, I think that.
Are we ready for the
covers.
questions? The next slide,
Yes.
I think, Carolyn. Great. Ty, do you want to just kind of walk through these before then we're going to open it up for clarifying questions on the material that you just presented, and then the questions themselves.
Yeah. So first question we're going to start off is what do projects need to do to meet a six-month timeline? Like what are some tangible activities that folks are needing to plan for in advance to reach a potential timeline. And then also what are some things that are just completely outside of your control, either statewide versus at the local level. And also I would and then also we could probably add just another bullet. Feel free to add in what's happening at the national level, like if you're hearing about from HUD or RD things that are going on, that would be a good place to add items outside of your control. And then the lender investor needs commitments. We know the capital markets are shifting, so it would be good to get a check-in from what your folks are hearing from your local lenders, CDC partner lenders, and national lenders would be good to hear as well. And then for those that are culturally specific leaders, what are some racial justice impacts that we need to be aware of with this potential shift? Because we do acknowledge that there are different unique factors that have contributed to historical legacy of racial disparate impacts. So for those who were willing to share, we'd like to hear more about that from your perspective. And then also lastly, what are some things that OHCS needs to do differently to shorten time frames that we need to shore up on our side?
All right, thanks, Ty. Jillian, is ready with a question. So feel free to comment either, questions about the overall presentation, and then any sort of clarifying or refining questions that you have about the questions before we move into small groups. So I see Jillian, then Shelley, then Jonathan.
Hi, thank you so much. To clarify, this 6-month readiness to proceed, 6 months within financial closing, is OHCS proposing, that has been kind of the standard for the 4% for a little while now. Is OHCS proposing that standard for all funds, including like LIFT, PSH, everything? Is that the readiness to proceed standard that we're talking about, or are we just talking about the 4%?
Yeah, I think this would be standard across all programs.
Okay. Sorry. That's I'm sure we'll get into it. Okay.
Okay, Shelley.
From the RD world. So as you're looking at readiness, I would consider, a 6-month readiness is 6 months from the time we submit the RD application, because we pretty much have to have all of our, funders and financing partners in line. We have to have a reservation award, but RD is taking 8 months to process to get to a closing. So, it's not, the closing won't be met within 6 months, but everything we need to get to a closing, we have to basically submit in the RD transfer app. So I just want you to kind of consider that timeline, that if you're looking at, developers meeting a timeline for readiness, I would use the readiness timeline of when you submit your RD transfer app. And then once we get to the closing branch, we engage the financing partners to complete their documents and get to closing.
Okay, Shelley, you were a little quiet during that comment, but I think
Sorry.
There you go. But essentially what you're saying is 9 months to accommodate RD's timeline.
Well, from the time you get a funding award, we're getting our transfer apps in within 3 to 4 months of funding award, but then RD takes 8 months to get to a closing. So as you're looking at developers meeting your readiness timeline, it would be for an RD project is you got your transfer app in within 6 months of a funding award, and then 8 months later we're closing. But we pretty much have the deal cooked for the transfer app.
Okay. Thanks for that, Shelley. Appreciate that. Jonathan, you're next, and then I see Andrea has her hand up.
Thanks, Kim. Maybe this is going to be in future sessions, but can you say a little bit more about pre-dev money being available? Because what we're talking about, especially if it's across all programs, is getting a project permit ready, taking it all the way through design. By the before you can even apply. And so if you're not selected, you're sitting out for months, if not years, while you reapply, and you've easily spent $1 million on pre-dev. So I'm just wanted to know, like, how much money are we talking about, and how widely available is it going to be as the department makes this transition?
I think, do you want me to take that one, Ty?
Sure. I guess. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll do a first shot. How about
Okay.
So I think we did receive a legislative commitment allocation of, I think, $9.7 million in pre-development. We'll be focusing on that in our next engagement. I think the other part of this is also really an update of our funding process. So there will still obviously be a lot of the constrained resources and how those are accessed and everything that will be impacted. But really, yeah, I mean, I agree that it will be impacting. It will be setting up our pre-development to help offset the impact of this. And $9.7 million isn't enough to bring all projects through. So, and I think this is, again, where we really need to understand the key pieces of both the process of getting ready to be as close to 6 months out at the time of reservation. So that's different from the time of application. And to be able to do that so that we can be kind of incorporating all of the feedback that we get in this conversation today. Sorry for stepping in there, Ty, if you have other thoughts.
Yeah, and Jonathan, yeah, I just, yeah, appreciate this calling that in and providing specific feedback on, okay, process wise, you would need to pay for X number of items, to even have a shot.
All right. And, we'll be talking more about this in small groups. So, appreciate part of what we're trying to do here is kind of level set before we go into the small group discussions. There will be more, opportunity for discussion, but you've got a couple more hands raised, which is great. Andrea, I see you. And then Robin, and I think, well, Jillian had her hand back up, but maybe took it down. So, if please feel free to jump in if you have some clarifying.
It just sounded like you wanted to move on, but I just wanted to add that, and I put this in the Q&A, that in order for our most recent project that closed, which is 116 units, in order to get within 6 months of closing, SEPA would have had to be out about $4.5 million with another $500,000 to go with no assurance of funding. It's a tremendous amount of risk for the nonprofit to take on, to have to be within 6 months of closing before we can apply. It is an incredibly high threshold. And we're not talking $100,000, we're talking millions of dollars that we would have to borrow at risk with no guarantee that we'll get funded. It's a tremendous amount of risk OHCS is proposing the nonprofits take on.
Hey, Andrea, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think my comment is really tied closely to what Jonathan and Jillian are speaking to. And so in terms of what OHCS can do differently to help the community of developers mitigate this risk that Jillian is speaking to, is how do we enter an application process knowing more that if our project is fundable or not. I think some of the examples that Ty raised in his presentation about other state financing agencies, I think in those examples, you know when you're doing an application that your project is very competitive, and I feel that we haven't reached that. We've made strides towards that here in Oregon, but this 6-month timeline and having more awareness of how if your project is competitive or not, go hand in hand, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. Robin? And you're on mute.
Okay, I'm gonna add to that because I work with stewardship development, and we did a project in Texas, and we hired consultants there, and they got us through the pre-dev process and then onwards, and we were successful, and we have a project funded in Houston. But the way that it's different is that we knew as soon as the pre-app 2-week ranked list came out whether or not we should continue to spend any more money at all. So we only had $20,000 in the pot at that point, including consultant time, to figure out whether we were ranked in any way, shape, or form to win. And then we were willing to go out and spend the 50 and the 100, but not the $500,000 that if we have to come in with permit ready drawings at 50 to 75%, that's $500,000 to an architect at least. And with $9 million for pre-dev, clearly that's not going to, cover anything like what we're talking about for the expenses that people would be out. And as much as I support nonprofits, and we often partner with nonprofits, if it's just nonprofits and culturally specific organizations, then my concern is that you're going to break the system that's actually working by trying to make this big shift. And so we got to have more certainty in land hunt time and more certainty early on before we start really spending the big bucks.
Thank you, Robin. Thanks for all these comments and clarifying questions. And we are not in a hurry here, so I don't want to, signal that we're rushing to move into breakout rooms. I think it's really important that we can go into these small group spaces and feel prepared to answer these questions. So happy to take a few minutes more, in terms of clarifying some of the presentation that Ty provided, or Robin, thank you for referencing the readiness planning document that we posted online. So let's just hang out here for just another second. Brian, Shelton, Kelly, I saw you had your hand up, you took it down. We're not rushing through here, so feel free to address a large group, or if you want to move on to breakout rooms too and save it, it's fine.
Yeah, no, that was me hitting the wrong button.
Oh, okay. All right. So Robin, I'm going to put your hand down for you, and I don't see any other hands, but we do have a few comments in the meeting chat to the host that I want to just make sure we're addressing. So Ty, a question came in. We understand the trouble with price inflation. However, the contractors give a bid at the beginning of the project. However, a year later, when you go to closing, these costs change. How does Readiness take this into consideration? Did you get that, or do you want me to repeat?
Yeah, I guess how does Readiness take that into consideration? So we're asking, we would want to have permit essentially closer permitting, so that the contractors' escalations, or the window of escalation, is shorter.
Okay. Yeah. And then I have another comment that I received for rural Oregon site selections, available developable land near desired amenities, due diligence items are not in our control. Environmental reviews take time along with permitting. So I think we'll probably dig into that one a little bit more in our breakout rooms as well. Probably, some pieces to maybe dig a little bit deeper into in our smaller group discussions. I think I captured all the stuff that was messaged to me, and I see Jonathan has his hand up again. Go ahead.
Thanks. I'll try to make this short. While we're all together and before we go into breakout rooms, it's occurring to me that if I think back 15 years, when really the resources were more or less 9% on the competitive side, and then there was unlimited PAB for multifamily. What would happen with the 9% Q, people will correct me if I'm wrong, is if you had a viable project, it would eventually get funded. And more or less, it wouldn't take more than 2 or 3 times. And yeah, when construction costs weren't escalating like they are now, maybe you could keep it together and wait that long. As much as it pinched your organization. And it just feels like that may be sort of informing a lot of the thinking here, is that at some, like we have a history of eventually viable projects get funded. And I think we might be in a different moment now, because there's so much gap money, but the PABQ is so pinched, and construction escalation has been so intense in recent years, and maybe it'll slow down at a new plateau, but it's not like tax credit pricing has gone up 40% in 3 years. And so I do hope we don't carry, maybe it's just me, but carry into this conversation an assumption that may be outdated, that viable projects can just kind of hang out for a while till they eventually get funded, because I do think the world may have changed since the time when that might have been more likely to happen.
Jonathan, I just want to step in and offer appreciation for the comment. I think that is true, right? There was try 2-3 times and you were likely to fall through. The scale of development has increased year over year. The type and the complexity of our resources has increased year over year. And now the constraint of some of the really foundational leverage points is significant. And so I think it's both that. I think the other piece I would want to add is just the default with the PAB constraint, the assumption that any project will be able to come, let's structure it as a 4% and that will be the fastest path. That is currently not the case. And I think we need to be really mindful of that shift and where we have resources and where we have the ability to fund it. I also want to just in terms of, and I think I appreciate all of the just real information around this true cost of getting to 6 months out. I also think what we're trying to say is getting to the final funding commitment when it is ready. That doesn't mean that we are not open to processes earlier than that to give some kind of surety. And so I think it's that is where I think in terms of focusing feedback, thinking what is that scenario that lets you have enough certainty. It's not necessarily the per unit dollar commitment in a thing, but it is something that gets you situated so that when we're finalizing the reservation or the commitment of funding, we're not in an iterative process any longer, and we're in a place where we're a little bit closer. And I think also that place of saying where's their comfort with the no, when it's saying that this is not being, is not competitive under this scoring rubric or priority structure. I think I personally, we all want to fund all of them. And now at this point, we don't have resources for all of the amazing projects that come forward. So how is it that feedback is strong, meaningful enough to change strategies early enough, right? When you're haven't put all of your resources into it. And so I think building that kind of the muscle at the front end from the project concept stage through, I think, from we're focusing on our actual funding strategies. I will also just acknowledge, and I think I've referenced this earlier, the legislative commitment to having us do this work. It was supported in bills that were passed in session, calling on us to embark on this change. And it includes a significant investment from the legislature in new capacity positions for us to be able to have front-end technical advisors, to be able to have real relationships around this early proactive pipeline management. And I think, thinking back a decade or two, we used to have the RADs, and this is a different role, but I think that idea that we have that active indicator and that active touch point to OHCS and funding processes, I'm hoping that as I think the whole picture starts to build together. And these are all really interconnected. And key to all of it is understanding. This is why we've queued up readiness. The first is to be able to cascade through. So if we can figure out what does readiness mean to us and how do we start getting that pinned down, then we can start saying, what does the pre-development focus on, and what does our application process and set-asides and all of those kind of big foundational items, how does that start fitting in and layering in? So I think just appreciation, again, everybody's thoughts and perspective on it. And I guess I would encourage you, say I know this is dramatic and it is a shift, and what makes this work? And I think, you know, so to get to that place, again, it's not saying we refuse to touch you until you come in cold, you know, 9 months out from an on an application, but that we want to be able to manage a process where we don't have projects sitting on desks for 2 and sometimes 3, 4 years. It is not getting that housing into community, and it is holding resources back that could be in the community. And I think those are balances that we need to figure out striking. And I think there's an answer in here, but we really do need to understand what are the critical benchmarks, what are the cost, what gives the confidence to do the investment, and all of that component. Sorry, I hope that didn't take us too off track
Yes.
here, Kim, but I
No.
just want to like appreciate, but I, you know, I think it is
Yes.
like seeing this as a different place, and it is a time of change. And I, you know, that's not the top priority for everybody, but it is the charge that we are working to execute here.
Yeah. Well, this is great dialogue, really. You know, this topic is one that, you know, is critical to the other topics in the meeting series. So spending a little bit more time here and fleshing this out is really important. So, and thank you all for being actively engaged in this discussion. I wanted to address a couple of questions that we got. So just a few more minutes here in the larger group format. Current 6-month readiness on 4% is actually increasing the timelines and construction escalations due to the number of projects and lack of surety. And the OHCS applications are spread out so far. Natasha, do you want to take that one?
Yes, I think it is the resource constraint, I think, that is the primary issue there, and that we are unable to put resources to all of the projects that are ready. And so we're trying to manage a process to prioritize those. And so I think we are well aware that this is delaying many projects that would otherwise want to have the resource available to be able to move forward. And I think we need to, this has been a difficult transition into the competitive structure. And ideally, we don't have a buildup of 5 years of ready projects relying on 4% credits that we need to now spread out over several years to be able to get through our pipeline. And so I think, yeah, there's tremendous impacts of that. And I don't think that we should understate the degree of that impact. And it is, I don't believe that it's fundamentally because of the competitive process, but I think it is that we have overbuilt the pipeline of projects that have their gap resources committed and structured to be deployed as a 4% project.
Thanks, Natasha. A couple more questions, and then we'll break into smaller groups. Got a question about for larger pre-dev loans, the scale that would be needed for this type of readiness. We've typically seen the lenders needing a funding reservation to even consider the loan. The early stage pre-development financing, the 100 to 200,000 scale loans can be secured without a funding commitment, but I have trouble seeing how lenders will lend millions without knowing their takeout. I think this is a similar sort of theme in some of the other questions. And then there's also around for HUD environmental review, how could the PJs, REs do environmental reviews in advance and approve sites in advance of the funding app? I think Vermont does something like this, so you know your site is good to go. Okay, 2 things kind of wrapped up there. Natasha, thanks.
Yeah, let's see. I think those are all really critical points. I think we're trying to wrap our mind through all of those components. I am working to structure a deliberate focus group conversation with lenders to hear their thoughts on what might be needed. I think it would be interesting to understand from the development community what you think has worked in the past, or what could work, or you know what that is, to be able to get that surety in that relationship form. But I think, yeah, certainly bringing lenders into this conversation will be critical to the success, and making sure that our process is providing the needed assurance to make sure that all resources can be aligned, ready, and able to move forward in conjunction. And I think on the HUD resources, there are significant impacts to of HUD requirements around this, both environmental review as well as choice limiting action. And I think really trying to navigate through what that means and how that looks, and tying into this effort to try to, again, make sure that we are doing final commitments to projects that are ready to move.
All right, thank you. And we did get a question that we're answering live here. Sorry, are you saying OHCS has already committed to the 6-month criteria with the legislature? Is this criteria already set?
So what we have, let's see, the NOFA reform broadly around centralizing an application structure, moving the dial on readiness, establishing a pre-development program, and other, incentives and pre-qualification processes. Those are all commitments that we have made, but the specifics of that and how that really works and will operate is open here for conversation. And so 6 months is a starting point.
Right. Not 6 months from application, but 6 months from funding reservation.
From
Is the
final
topic at
funding
hand.
reservation. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, this very helpful, I think, for all of us to spend time in this large group format to have the Q&A and kind of tease out some of these questions and some of the content that we heard earlier. Now we're going to move into smaller groups and really try to dig into some of the details. Our charge in the small groups is to answer these questions. And so you will have access in your small group to an easy retro board where you can add your own comments, or as you're dialoguing, hopefully with your colleagues in this small group, you're kind of working out through some of these details and maybe adding in pieces and helping to answer the questions together. So you can summarize those and put those into the easy retro board as well. So we're going to take, as I said, about 30 minutes in these small group setting to dialogue about these questions, and really appreciate the opportunity here for your input and for you to have cross communication with your peers in this space, as well as the OHCS staff that will be kind of helping to move these questions forward. So with that, these will be self-selected. I think for those who joined late, you maybe missed the poll, but we have 4 groups. And so please select where you work most, or, spend the most time, or represent a certain area. We've got a rural breakout room. We've got a urban breakout room outside of the Portland metro area. We do have a Portland metro area breakout room, and then we have a statewide breakout room. So please, I'm crossing my fingers that I'm going to open all these rooms and you will be able to self-select into those rooms. If you have any issues, you can always return to the main room. Carolyn will be there to help assist you. That goes for our facilitators too. If you have anything that you need, just send a message and we'll try to assist as best we can. So we'll see you all back here in about 30 minutes.
Kim, can you stop recording?
Oh, yeah. Good idea. Okay.